wiring up is kind of fun. Good afternoon, everyone. I think we all tend to take bathrooms for granted. If you've got to go, you get up, go out, you go, do everything, come back, it's done. We kind of don't even think about it. We expect they're going to be there. I am a transgender woman, and I'm contemplating my first trip to North Carolina. In North Carolina, House Bill 2 has just been passed. HB 2, it's also known as. And I figure if I go to North Carolina, I'm going to have to use the restroom, and there's going to be a bit of a challenge there. First of all, I'm going to need my driver's license. Pennsylvania, my legal name, and also my gender, my preferred gender. In Pennsylvania, I can change that, so that's no problem. But I suspect that's not good enough for North Carolina. I'm going to have my birth certificate, but I'm not going to take my birth certificate along. Because in North Carolina, I've got to prove my sex. My birth certificate, I can't change that until after surgery, so I'm not going to have that. What's next? Well, probably in car inspections, if they're doing security, have these little mirrors on wheels they put under the car. And if I'm wearing a dress or I have a skirt on, I figure that's the next thing. And if that's not good enough, then there's probably a little groping going on. So it's sort of like going through the security line at the airport. DNA tests, that's the thought, but my understanding is it takes 90 minutes to process a DNA test. That's the fastest we have. And I don't know about you, but I cannot hold it for 90 minutes. So if there's an entrepreneurial opportunity here for somebody, come up with a 60-second DNA sex test. In many states, we have found, and you've heard of, I'm sure, if it's Texas, Arkansas, just keep going, we've had to deal with bathroom laws. And a couple examples here in Texas. For a transgender person to use a restroom, in the bill that was proposed, it would have been a misdemeanor. And even the owner of that building could have been charged with a felony and imprisoned and put in jail. The bill that was brought up in Kansas I find most interesting because that bill would have allowed the state to give a bonus, or bounty actually, to the person who reported a transgender person using the wrong restroom. $2,500 bounty that would go to that person. The laws have varied. There have been many different places. South Dakota, the governor vetoed the passage of the law that was there, in part because he spent time talking to transgender people and looking at testimony. There we go. And some of the testimony looked like and talked with people about was that of Thomas Lewis. Thomas is a transgender student at a high school in South Dakota. Thomas does not use the restrooms in his high school. He holds it. He's been ostracized from the men's room and from the women's room. So he goes home at lunchtime and urinates. He says it's a little bit of discomfort. It's a little bit disturbing, but he makes it through. He's adjusted. But there's also some things he doesn't talk about, and that's the health risks that he has. Possibilities of bladder infection, urinary tract infection, kidney infections, kidney stones. So, regular urination is important for everybody. For transgender people, particularly for transgender women, it has become a point of contention in our society. The ideal, of course, is that, as I started, we all go use the restroom the way we want to, the way we need to. It's not a second thought. Even gender-neutral restrooms, such as the one that's out here in the lobby, anybody can use, regardless of their need. But we're now at a time of conflict and a time of change in which we've seen a lot happen in the last few weeks that focuses on transgender women and the issue of bathrooms. And there are three reasons, I think, that we have this little discussion going on in our country right now. One is the gender binary. The second is violence against women. And the third that we're seeing is fear of change. And the first, the gender binary, female, male. Sometimes you get other added to the list, but not always. We all have sex. We're all sexual beings. When we're born, we're assigned a particular sex based upon what the nurses, the doctors see. So there's a physical manifestation of sex. Gender, however, is not sex. Sex and gender are two separate, distinct constructs. Gender and gender identity is about who we feel we are inside. So people, many of you in this room, Your physical sex matches the gender identity you feel inside. You're cisgender people. I and my sisters and brothers who are transgender or gender variant, my gender identity differs from that which I was born with, and which I regretfully still have, but will change at some time in the future. That difference that we have, that we're transgender people, is in part what's at the bottom of what we're dealing with in society right now. Family Research Council is a group that is very much behind the anti-transgender bathroom bills here in the United States. They are a hate group, recognized as such. And essentially their message comes down to sex is gender, gender is sex, sex is immutable. It's in our genes after all. And that could be a whole different talk about what's in our genes. So the FRC is basically saying that there are no transgender people. People who think they are transgender, transgender women who think they are transgender are just men because, well, sex is immutable. Sex and gender are the very same thing. So how do they explain us? Well, we're crazy. We're all mentally ill. You know, we were sexually abused as children. We had tumultuous family lives as children. And you know, we were just in situations as children which we shouldn't have been put up to. Therefore, we're all mentally ill, regardless of what the American Psychological Association says, and that's why we claim we are transgender. Transgender people, we don't quite agree with that. Neither does my psychologist, by the way. That carries through, that whole attitude about mental illness and transgender people being mentally ill, carries through into the public debate that we've heard. For instance, coming out of Florida in a school district, you see delusional people, evil. In South Dakota, comments about, from a state senator even, that treating the wrong anatomy, or should be treating the head. A woman in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the public discussion of the ordinance that led to HB 2, was heard to say that transgender people are like people who don't know if they are a cat or a bird, which was very interesting to say the least. There are other manifestations of this idea that transgender people are mentally ill. We are worthless in our society. You can see that in instances where transgender people do not report crimes, and many do not, because of fear of re-victimization, because of harassment, assault, even rape by police officers. Last year, 2015, 21 transgender women were murdered in the United States. This year, 9 transgendered women have been murdered so far in the United States. We're ahead of pace, including Maya Young, 21 of Philadelphia. A transgender woman was murdered this last weekend as well in Maryland. So this idea that transgender people are mentally ill carries over in the way transgender people are treated. Another reason we see issues in society about bathroom issues is violence against women. If you've seen any coverage anywhere about the rallies in Houston or in South Carolina, North Carolina, any of the places they've gone on, you see the message: no men in women's bathrooms. Remember, according to the FRC, sex is gender, gender is sex, sex is immutable. So transgender women are not women, they're men. So if they use the women's restroom, they're men harassing women in the restroom. And that violence is a real issue in the United States. 1/4 of women in the United States experience severe physical violence in their lifetime. 5.2 million women are victims of stalkers each year. 20% of women are raped in their lifetime. 1.3 million women are raped every year. The violence against women is true and factual, but it's not violence conducted by transgender women. What we see with the bathroom bills is that the concern for women is very true. There are groups who want to keep the sanctity of women in place and make safe restrooms. There are groups who wish to look at those numbers and say we need safe restrooms, and people have responded to those fears. And one consequence has been that we now see transgender men using women's restrooms. In its self-interest, legislators have not figured out there are transgender men in the world. When asked, a number of legislatures have responded with who, what, female to male transgender people now posted into the restroom, which is kind of against the whole idea that people were expecting to take care of in the first place. Data is all very clear. Transgender women are at least as much at risk in restrooms as non-transgender women and children. Oops. The data is very clear on that. And in a couple of cases, we're going faster forward than I went. In a couple of cases, we've seen harassment and threats for transgender people in restrooms. Verbally harassment, disrespect is a full level. Half of all transgender people are expected to be sexually assaulted or abused in their lifetime. Chrissy Lee Paulus in 2011, a transgender woman in Baltimore, Maryland, was assaulted by 2 other women and severely beaten. She had to go to the hospital because she tried to use the women's restroom in a McDonald's. So it's a real threat to transgender women as well. Okay. Finally, we have the fear of change. In 1965, we saw the very first demonstrations in Philadelphia outside of Independence Hall by the LGBT community. In the following year was Stonewall riots in New York. 39 years later, 2004, Massachusetts approved same-sex marriage. By 2009, 26 states banned same-sex marriage. June 26, 2015, it's not even a year ago, Supreme Court of the United States said same-sex marriage is a national civil right. 11 years. It took only 11 years from Massachusetts to last year. That was change that was very quick for a lot of people. People who watching the world change so quickly, expecting men to be men, women to be women. What they're seeing instead is that the world's changing. They can't depend on men always being the leaders, women being the followers. They can't depend on heterosexual couples always producing children and in their lifetimes. They can't depend on men being the breadwinners only and women bearing children and rearing them. And then those transgender people show up and they just make a hash of the whole thing. A lot of what is happening with the bathroom bills is a response to that rapid change that people are dealing with. Bathroom legislation is an attempt, I think, to stop that, move backwards in a little time, where men were men and women were women. We didn't have any of this gender issue to mess up the works. But the reality of it is that gender issue is true. It is out there. And we can see the discrimination that's involved, whether it's in workplace, whether it's in public accommodations, whether it's in housing, where many transgender people can be kicked out of their housing. Because we don't have any laws in the United States that cover non-discrimination against transgender people across the whole country. There are 17 states. There are many municipalities, including Easton, Bethlehem, and Allentown, which have laws which cover discrimination against transgender people in housing, employment, and public accommodations. But there's no law that generally covers the whole nation. And there's not one introduced in Congress either at this point. So we have to live in a world where that discrimination is really a part of it. 16% of Americans say they know someone who's transgender. 84% of Americans, obviously, say they don't. They may know of Caitlyn Jenner. They may have seen Caitlyn Jenner on television, but that's not the same thing as knowing someone who is transgender. A recently published study showed that being able to talk to someone who is a transgender, spend a little time with them, getting to know them, exchanging ideas, has a long-term impact on the attitudes about transgender people that others hold. A positive impact as well. So the moral of that little story is that get to know us. we'll talk. We want to talk about our world and our life and what it's about. And being able to get out that message and to share that message makes a very big difference with people. Now, I don't choose to use the women's restroom because it's more convenient and easier. It really isn't. There are lines in many. It takes a little longer too, but I choose to use the women's restroom for one reason. Well, actually there's two. The most important reason is I am a woman. I have been, always will be. So I'm using the women's restroom. The other reason's important too. I have to pee. Thank you.